Well, I was fortunate enough to be asked by the History Channel, the production team working for the History Channel on this new program series, to take part in understanding better the death and what ultimately happened to Adolf Hitler. Quite obviously a fascinating project to be involved with. And they flew me over to Germany and Russia, where we did, in Germany, we did soil tests going to areas where Hitler had been buried and dug up and reburied by the Soviets after the Second World War, and where his eventual final remains after the full cremation they did in 1970. So we followed that whole story in Germany, but had an opportunity to go to Moscow and actually do a forensic analysis of the Calvaria or cranial vault fragment they had there that was brought back and assumed to be Adolf Hitler. Yeah, a physical examination of the Calvaria or cranial vault that we looked at. You know, trying to match it up with Hitler became problematic because we started to see things that we didn't expect. And for example, the bullet wound in this individual comes out the back of the head, and supposedly Hitler had the gun to his right temple. So that forensically that doesn't work. This person was shot from the face. The other thing was the small nature of the cranial vault fragment. It was rather gracile and small, meaning that, you know, within our species, the sexual dimorphism is males are usually bigger, females are smaller, and usually a male like Hitler, who was about 5'8", 5'9", 180 pounds, while he wasn't a very big man, he was big enough to have more of a robust, I would have expected seeing a more robust cranial vault, thicker, more musculature. This was very smooth, very thin, more in line with what I would have suspected to see from a female. The other thing were the suture closures, where the cranial vault fragments come together, kind of like at a jigsaw puzzle. These things grow and fuse together during your life and into adulthood, during growth and development, and then once they do, as you age, they close down, so they become, you don't see the lines as clearly, they obliterate. And these were wide open, and as a result, it was an individual I would have expected 20 to 40 years of old. So if the police had brought me this cranial vault fragment for an identification, I would have said female, 20 to 40 years of age, in a house fire. So we had problems. Now, in the range of variability, it still could have been him. You know what I'm saying? Because, you know, just gross morphology alone raises issues, but there are variabilities in the closure rates. There are variability in size, and it could be that the Germans had the story wrong. He shot himself in the face, or in the mouth. So we had issues, but it really wasn't until the DNA that we could be more specific about the conclusions.
So the bone fragments were put in a sterile test tube, and we used a little sterile pestle and ground the bones to a very fine powder. And then we added a special buffer that will coax the DNA out of the bone fragments, basically. And we spun it overnight to gently get the DNA out using special chemicals that are designed for that. And then the next day, we cleaned up the DNA, and then we ran it through a standard test that you would do in a crime lab to find matches between evidence and a suspect. So we did a standard DNA test like that. One of the things the DNA test can tell you is whether the DNA is male or female. We also were able to gather some other genetic markers, but in the absence of reference samples to compare those two, we really can't draw any conclusions from them at all.
In the end, even though we saw morphological characteristics that didn't seem right, it was the DNA that made it conclusive, and the conclusion was that this is a woman, not a male. So it's a female. So it can't possibly be Adolf Hitler.